Hey everyone, this is Louis7, and today I have a video on the Brawler beta and the Lord of the Rings Online. And this one's going to be a little bit of an odd style, and it's a follow-up to my previous kind of little more in-depth dive to base unspec gameplay. And today we will be taking a look at the red line. So my plan is to have this kind of like my trade analysis build guide videos I have done for other classes, but less of a guide and more of a learning experience both for me and you as we learn the mechanics of the red line and basically how the brawler works a little bit more in depth. So hopefully this will be helpful, and let's go ahead and get started with it. So in the last video, I will use information from that. So if you really don't know the base gameplay, I do recommend that. Otherwise, we will kind of start with all that information in mind. And starting off, just speccing into the red line, we see we get two skills. So Pummel is going to be a skill that has a channel effect and some immediate damage. The channel effect seems like it is not actually working. It does very little damage. You see it's about 10% or even less than the immediate damage on that. If we look at all of our other skills, it's just really weak, the channel effect. But we will take a look at that in more detail in a moment to actually see it play out. The other skill you get is Shattering Fist, which is going to be a debuff that reduces enemy armor to make them take more damage, so something useful to use that does consume metal with that. Both of these are metal consumers and both cost 3 metal. We also get some might and melee damage. So going ahead and speccing into this, let's actually take a moment, step back, and look at Pummel. So that is the new skill we got, the first one, and I just need to build a little bit of metal. So if I use Pummel, you can see it has the channel effect, and the damage it does isn't great. You also stop auto attacking, it looks like, so that's a little bit of extra damage loss. You see the auto attack does like 13,000, 9,000, 20k crit. When I used Pummel, it was all like 2,000 damage or even less, so that was not a good look. We can actually use it again. I'll have a little bit of a damage buff this time, but you can see I stop auto attacking and I only get that base damage. So it also canceled there kind of randomly. I don't exactly know why it canceled. I have run into that issue before. I don't know if there's some issue with metal that'll just randomly cancel or you getting hit, but Pummel is actually a skill I mentioned I would be giving some feedback as we go through this. Or I meant to mention, my plan is to not only cover and learn this stuff, but also give some points of feedback and just thoughts I have on the things we see. But with Pummel, one of the big things I would really love with a skill like this is if it stunned enemies. It could even do an AoE stun and only hit a single target. I don't know how mechanically or technically that could work in LOTRO, but if it does, it would be neat. But at the very least, I would love to see the skill stun the enemies. I think that would add a lot of flavor and add a lot of usefulness out of the skill. And I think the damage for every 1 second should be buffed. Also, don't know why it does fire damage. That doesn't make much sense to me. I feel like that should be changed to something more reasonable. Although I will say punching your enemy with fire does sound pretty neat. So if you can add some fire to the fist when you actually use Pummel, might actually really enjoy that. But otherwise, that little side note joke type thing aside, let's go ahead and move on. The other skill we got is Shattering Fist. So let's go ahead and see how it works. We want to learn everything here. So we'll use Shattering Fist. And it did debuff the enemy, and it gave them a big reduction in armor, so they should start taking more damage. That one is pretty simple. Now, another issue we will have to look at is what type of skills these are. Well, they're both actually balanced attacks, so that's pretty simple. They belong here with Smash. I'm organizing my skills this way just so we can get some differentiation between these types of abilities, because it is actually going to be important mechanic-wise with the Brawler, but there is no indication of if these are balanced, heavy, or quick attacks, but they're all important to actually look at here. So that is what is going on with these and why they're kind of spread out really weird and not quite based on like general usefulness or damage as I usually would. It's to help me and hopefully help you all as I show this learn a bit more about the Brawler. So diving into the traits, a lot of these I will say felt unfinished or like they just needed a lot of adjusting. Unfortunately, this is probably the worst part of the Brawler to me, is the traits and the way they are. I really like the idea of speccing into only the red or blue line and having the yellow line as additional traits you can put into, but when we look into the traits, the set bonuses themselves, everything just feels unfinished and unpolished. So I feel like that's the biggest work the Brawler needs, is fixing up of the traits and mechanics and just a lot of cleaning up there, it feels like. But I did want to point that out before we actually get into this. So one thing we have is you have dexterous setup damage. So the way this works, I assume, would be the setup damage that dexterous hook does. If I apply this, I put 1 point into that, so it should be 5%. And then the bonus of this should be 30. Well, it was 35% before. It should be 40% if I apply it again. It should be 45%. I don't know if that's just not visually displaying on the tooltip, but that should increase the setup damage of dexterous hook, and I actually like the idea of that trait. Seems like it would be fairly useful. Now, setup skill damage is... The setup skills actually do pretty low damage, so I don't know quite how useful this trait is. We'll still put points into it. I plan to put points into everything just so we learn what they do have, but one active skill you get, which I probably should have pointed out first and looked at first, is First Strike. Should have been first. Anyway, the point is, I don't think you all can actually quite see this. One problem with my face cam being there. Let's go ahead and move the examination tooltip. We'll move it over the bags. Hopefully that's not distracting for y'all. But anyway, where are we? Yeah, First Strike is an active skill. Let's go ahead and take a look at it in more detail here. It costs 1 trait point at the very beginning, and it's a quick strike that you can use when your targets have 80% or more morale, and it does a lot of damage, way more than any of the other basic abilities, and even more than a lot of the metal consumers. Our strongest one right now is either a Shattering Fist or a Strike Towards the Sky. It looks like Strike Towards the Sky would be strongest, and the damage it does is actually kind of right in between those two, so it's pretty strong, and whenever your target has above 80% morale, it's probably worth using. The one, I guess, sort of downside of it is it doesn't build metal, and I actually feel like this would be a really fun skill and perhaps a very thematic skill and flavorful skill if it did build metal, because it's the first strike. It seems like something that would get you ready for combat. It would suddenly build you a bunch of metal and get you ready to use some stronger attacks right away. So a note of feedback I have is while the damage it does is appealing, and I don't know balance-wise quite yet if it would be worth regularly using. It seems like it would at this point. But the note of feedback I have is even if you have to reduce the damage, I would love to see it build like 3 or even 6 metal or fill your metal up. That last one might be a bit extreme, but I'd love to see it build quite a bit of metal to get you started on the right foot with the first strike of combat. Well, let's see, setting that aside, I don't know the best way to actually do this. Usually I would look at all the set bonuses as we unlock them, but I think first we can look at all of the traits. So we just have a basic one that builds might there. Here's a basic melee crit chance. These are both in the second row as we have it. So Revel and Victory. This is going to generate 1 metal over time for a short duration after defeating an enemy. Kind of hard to test that here with training dummies that we can't really feasibly defeat right now. But anyway, that is going to build metal, and then it looks like you get some more pulses with that. Now, this is a buff that is, I think we'll take a moment to look at. So I'll go ahead and apply that, and we see we get this buff for the Joy of Battle offense. So for this one, looking at what it actually does is it decreases incoming damage, but also does not let you parry or evade. And then as you get hit, you gain a stacking damage buff. So this is a little bit odd how it works. It gets up to 10 stacks of the damage buff, but essentially as a brawler, you cannot parry evade, so you will be getting hit. And then when you get hit, you just get stronger. It's the Joy of Battle. That's the flavor of the ability, it seems. Also, there's a Joy of Battle defensive skill. I'm guessing somewhere in the blue line, but honestly, 100% don't 100% remember that right away. But when we get to the blue line video, I guess we'll see if there is a Joy of Battle defense, which I think there is. Anyway, the point is that is going to be a both defensive and offensive buff at the same time. So it's a little bit weird how it works, but that is actually kind of like the idea of that buff. It's probably not going to be the most useful in group content. And when you actually have a tank that is not yourself taking all the damage and taking all the hits, but in solo I could see it working out to be kind of fun. Now I will say the duration of it being 10 seconds and the effect expiring out of combat 9 seconds seems a little bit odd to me. Just the wording on that, we'd have to actually see how it works. Unfortunately, I guess I could try to get the training dummy to hit me. We can do some investigation. That's the whole point of this video. So it's called Heal Proc is the icon for it, so it's a little bit consuming. It also confusing. It also does consume. That was getting ahead of myself. It does consume 3 metal. I did not realize that. But we'll see. The training dummy should hit us a little bit here. At least he was a moment ago. I'm getting a heal, and I have no idea why. It says heal. Maybe that's something else we just haven't quite looked at yet, but there's Joy of Battle, plus 30% melee damage at 6, so it's probably plus 50% melee damage. And the duration is 20 seconds there, as you can see. So that is how that ability works. Very good on the training dummy to help me see that. So I will go ahead and put these up here just so y'all, if you want to, can look at it a little bit more as I remind myself what we were looking at. Oh yeah, so next up we have more traits. So this one is Fulgurant Strike. Currently it has a 30-second cooldown. This will move it down to a 20-second cooldown after we put all 5 points in that. Now Fulgurant Strike is strong, but it also has the interrupt, and that can make you be able to interrupt quite a bit more frequently. About 33% more frequently when we put the points in. So go ahead and do that. Next up we have Latent Light, and I believe this was a bug trait. I don't know if it still is, but it says all metal spinning attacks have a chance to trigger a burst of light type damage. Now I don't know the chance, but I know if you put 5 points in this, you can get plus 25% chance. So let's go ahead and do that and see if we trigger that attack at all and how frequently. So I'm just going to focus on using metal consumers. Don't really care too much about what else I am doing right now. Just doing some fun ones maybe. And we're going to see if we get Latent Light to trigger based on what we can see in combat analysis, because it says what does what. Now the bug, while I am going on about this, the bug that was in the earlier beta is that it would do 1 damage, and I think was not triggering all that frequently at all. But we can go ahead and fight here for a little bit, and I will come back when we actually get one. Alright, so found I did get a few Latent Light procs, and unfortunately I couldn't really tell the proc rate, how many abilities I used, if I went a little bit more in depth. This is like a starter in depth, I feel like. But anyway, the point is I did get a few triggers of that, and it does kind of respectable damage. It sees, it looks like about 13, actually about 14 to 15k, 14.4k on the average hit of that, which is about half of what a lot of the metal consumers do at baseline. So that's a pretty good chunk of damage, and we did get the increased chance for that. Now, this is the only source of light damage that I am aware of that brawlers have, and the next trait essentially increases the damage of Latent Light. This is a trait that I feel like should be reworked, in my opinion. Increasing light damage on a class with only 1 light damage source, I just feel like there could be something else. It seems like a trait that does not belong, or there should be more light damage from a brawler. I don't know what that other light damage would be, since there is no other light damage. It doesn't seem like a really brawlery thing to have a bunch of light damage going around. So the feedback and thoughts I have here is that it should probably be reworked into something else, or somehow lumped into this trait and just add another trait. If you do really want to increase the damage of Latent Light, maybe lump it into this, give it both a chance to trigger and increase the Latent Light damage in one trait, and just do something else with this, because right now it's a feel bad trait. In my opinion, I would feel bad if it's the only thing I can put points in that's useful. Of course, the yellow line would probably negate that ever being a thing, but it just doesn't do too much, and again only affects the Latent Light. But still, we'll put points in it because we are going full red line here. And I guess we should take a moment to go back and look at this aggressive posture. Now, an important note about this character's gear is it's kind of semi-decent endgame gear with a couple random pieces missing for 130. The gear isn't too relevant, but the bigger point I have here is the physical mitigation. That's actually going to be important when we look at this new buff we got. So that trait gets us aggressive posture. I put 2 points in it and didn't even read what the second thing did. But at the first point, it gives you plus 10% melee damage, and the second point will make it 15% melee damage. It's a toggle skill to get that damage increase, but it gives you a pretty sizable decrease in physical mitigation. So if I look at my physical mitigation baseline with this character, it's 53%. If I toggle that, it's 45.1%. So that could be quite the amount of damage I take that is increased, but at the same time I will be doing 15% more damage, and that is how that buff works. So it's a toggleable buff you can get with that. And I do have to admit, this is a buff that I did not really take a liking to at first, but after just having more time to settle on it and think about it, I think I actually do like this buff. There's a similar one we will get in the blue line that I believe functions kind of like decreasing your damage but giving you more defense mitigation, something like that. And I actually kind of like that style. It's if you want to be an aggressive brawler, you take more damage, but you do more damage. If you want to be defensive, you deal less damage, but then you focus more on your finishes, take less damage. Anyway, we can move on from that, and that is how that functions, so pretty basic. Next up, we just have Devastate damage. This is the first reference that I at least immediately remember or recognize, where Devastate attacks are actually called out specifically instead of critical hits. It seems like with every other class, everything is about critical damage rather than devastating hits and devastate damage. Now, devastates are very rare, and this is kind of an odd thing to me that they would choose devastate damage. It's also really odd that it has the devastate, I believe that is devastating hit, from the Redline Champion, that icon, for this specific trait. So it almost seems to me like this is kind of buggy and maybe it's not what it's supposed to be, but that's just because of how it lines up with the specific champion devastating strike that it feels that way. But it's really odd, kind of like this light damage increase that the brawlers have. I'm not really sure I'm a fan of this trait being a thing for the devastating damage. Maybe other people would find it more exciting, but yeah, I just don't quite know on it. It seems like devastates are way too unreliable for that. Just for reference, I have a 24.6% chance for a melee crit, but my devastating hit is only 4.9%, so they're quite rare, and the damage bonus on them just feels a little bit odd to me. But that is where I will leave that. I don't know if I would rather critical damage, to be honest with the brawler, though. My impression is it's not really a big crit based and crit magnitude based class, but maybe something like attack speed, attack duration could feel a little bit more thematic, or I don't know. It just feels a little bit out of place to me, and being devastate makes it extra weird, I think, is my impression on that. Alright, so well, I actually haven't been at this too long, but still have been here a long time, and we can go ahead and look at the next trait, which this one reduces enemy incoming healing. It seems like this is the type of trait that every class, every trait tree has something like this that just feels fairly useless, except for maybe PvMP. I could definitely see this having use in PvMP, but a lot of PvE stuff I don't see this getting all too much use out of. Maybe there will be some instance mechanics, or there are some instance mechanics that I'm just not as familiar with, where this would have some use, but yeah, I feel like this is kind of a standard thing that is okay, even if it's, to me, honestly, boring and unexciting. I can see the point of having a trait like that, especially if you do look towards PvMP. Alright, so moving on, we do have the last set of traits, and there's a very exciting one to start, which is going to be an active skill, Fist of the Valor, which does a lot of damage and functions like Upshot. Now, one thing that I believe is not actually indicated, we can go ahead and spec into that, go ahead and get it and apply so we can look at it in more detail. But one thing not indicated on it is it does actually consume all of the metal that you have, and this is something we can test here in a second just to double check and confirm that. But for people unfamiliar maybe with the Upshot for the Hunters, it does more damage for the amount of metal you have, and it will consume all of your metal as a baseline cost of 3 metal and has a 20-second cooldown. And it says the bonus damage stacks with Battle Flow. Don't currently recognize what Battle Flow is. Maybe we can look at it if it is a skill, or there's Battle Flow. It's actually the last set bonus we haven't even looked at, which I have a weird note on Battle Flow when we do get to that. I kind of remember this coming up now. Anyway, the point is we want to see what Fist of the Valor, aka Armor Break as the icon indicates. We want to see how it actually functions and see if it does reduce all of our metal. So I'll go ahead and just fill up the metal, and we will use Fist of the Valor here, and it did consume all of the metal and did 121,000 damage. Now, something we can do to actually look at how it functions is it does 121,000 and 108,950 from 9 metal, so it does even show in the description how much bonus damage from the metal it consumes. So if I go back to this, it looks like we are the cooldown on it is about to finish. So if I just use that ability again and only used it at 3 metal that time, if I can try to find that hit. So that's the old one with 120,000. This time it did a lot less damage, I know, but here we do. It actually did 144,000 because it got a really big crit. but only 43,000, about 43.4k of that was from the metal, is only 3 metal. So that's how that ability works kind of very generally. Gameplay wise, this is something I have not gone into too much detail on the things we have gotten, mainly because we have gotten Pummel, which is kind of a broken skill that is not really worth using now. We'll have to see how it actually works when they buff up the channel damage, which hopefully they do, otherwise it will forever remain a useless skill. Otherwise, there's Shattering Fist, which is a debuff. You seem to want to use that once to debuff the enemy and maybe even use it on cooldown. Maybe use it over Hand Smash. This is actually a good point. Right now, something I actually don't like about the balance between these two skills is there's almost no point in using overhand smash, except for the short cooldown. You might have like 1 or 2 times overhand smash decreases incoming healing. Actually did not know that overhand smash decreased incoming healing, so maybe that would be a point to use that. That's probably some sort of set bonus or something we got that I just have not looked into yet. But the point is, Shattering Fist does more damage than overhand smash, which seems a little bit odd to me immediately, especially when Shattering Fist is the one that has the traditionally more useful effect, especially in PvE, when not considering PvMP, where you might want that decreased incoming healing debuff or certain mechanics. But anyway, the point is, the balance, the tuning, I guess, on the different metal consumers we have just feels off with a lot of these things. It's not exclusive for like Shattering Fist versus overhand smash. There are a lot of things like that that I went into on the last video that just seems like the tuning feels off, and maybe I'll go more into detail on that later. But the kind of point I have here is, yeah, so I had to remind myself the point. The point is in the gameplay flow and general priority of skills you have is it seems like Fist of the Valor is going to be the highest priority. Just use that for the tons of damage. Use something like Shattering Fist to keep up the armor debuff, and then the other big one is actually going to be Strike Towards the Sky, which does a lot of damage, and it's the strongest metal consumer outside of Fist of the Valor we have right now. And there's also Fulgurant Strike. If you don't need the interrupt, it actually does a pretty decent amount of damage. It does do more damage than Shattering Fist, but the general gameplay flow is lump everything into Fist of the Valor and try to get the most damage out of that and use it as frequently as possible, and use it at the highest metal possible, quite like Upshot for the Redline Hunters. I keep mentioning that because it functions very much so the same as that. It seems, based on my early impressions and testing, that does seem like the strategy for general gameplay that we have here with the red line. Anyway, we do have one more trait, and it's the bottom right one, and this is going to be Battle Fury, and this is a cooldown skill, 5-minute cooldown, and let's go ahead and look at what it does and see how it functions. So, Battle Flow or Enhanced Battle Flow, which, by the way, I have not seen a single reference to Battle Flow in the game. I know we already looked at something like that in the trait trees and found something that mentioned Battle Flow, but what it actually is Enhanced Battle Flow. It says right here, Enhanced Battle Flow replaces Battle Flow. So here's the cooldown skill we got, Battle Fury, and here is the reference I have to Battle Flow. Now, I believe regular Battle Flow might be in our passives. Yeah, so this is something inherent to brawlers. If I can get out of the text box there, we can anchor that, I believe. So this is something just inherent to brawlers. You do more damage per pip of metal you have. So one of the things that is, that might be like champion, I honestly don't know what that class, but theme that is similar to Beornings is Beornings in the red line get more damage, I think, and maybe crit damage, something like that. But basically they want to maintain high wrath because they get benefit from that. It's kind of similar with the brawlers. It seems like you want to try to maintain high metal because you gain a damage buff. If I actually look at my buff, it have 9 metal, that's plus 40.5% melee damage. So it is kind of crazy, the buff, but that is how that functions. And the point before we actually start looking at the set bonus, the point is that Battle Flow grants an additional 5% melee damage per pip. So when you have full 9 metal and you use this cooldown, then your Enhanced Battle Flow, as you see right now, the damage on this is actually a little bit inconsistent with what Battle Flow and even Enhanced Battle Flow say I should have. But when I use this cooldown, that should give me an extra amount of damage. And actually, let me just get in combat and build metal real quick and See how that actually should be working. So there is definitely some odd inconsistency here. So right now I'm up to Endurance 9 plus 54% melee damage. That is definitely not 5% more per pip. 5% more per pip would be 45% more melee damage. So unfortunately with that last recording, I actually ended up muting myself somehow and lost quite a few minutes there of footage, but I think what I was going on about was the discrepancy between metal and battle flow and how much actually damage it applies. So at a baseline level, you get 4.5% melee damage per metal. It is supposed to be 10% baseline based on battle flow, but keep in mind I have the redline traits and we actually have enhanced battle flow, which is the last set bonus. I know we haven't gone over the set bonuses yet, but that is what that last one does, and this replaces battle flow, so you're supposed to get plus 15% skill damage, and right now it is only plus 4.5% skill damage. Now if I do unspec, let's see, the best way to do this is not going to be that. We'll just totally respec. And I will go ahead and consume some metal and see how that works. So we'll hit this guy once, we'll get some metal, and it is 3%. So the numbers it says on all that stuff is inaccurate compared to what it actually does in game. And I think this discrepancy just needs to be fixed. Whatever the reason there is a discrepancy for balance or the text just being wrong or whatever it is, I think it needs to be fixed if you are actually supposed to do more damage or not. But yeah, that is what is going on with all that in the metal. And essentially the trait, I don't remember if I actually went into details on this for what was and wasn't muted, is you get extra damage compared to what you would have for the 20 seconds with that. So if you have this buff up and you are building metal with it, then you will get some extra melee damage along with that. It's a really long cooldown. This is something odd about this cooldown, is it's really long and it seems relatively weak unless it actually is 5%, which it is not. I think that is actually when the mute came in. It's supposed to give you plus 45% total damage essentially, but it does not give anywhere near that. It's about 13.5% at full metal. So yeah, a little bit of oddness there. Unfortunately, my nose got itchy. But we can go ahead and look at the next things we have with the red line is really just the set bonuses. So the set bonus, before I get into that, actually, I want to organize my skills a little bit more. One thing we are supposed to keep in mind is what type of attacks our abilities are. So we have a bunch of balanced attacks, which are shift 1 through shift 4. I know the organization, I have to remind myself even that this is weird, is a little bit odd, but that's what it is. Then we have our heavy attacks. I will we'll slide that down so we can put all these other things over here. So these are going to be our heavy attacks right here. Balanced attacks are 1 through 4. These are heavy attacks, and then we have the utility type ones are all of our quick attacks. So our quick attacks, I'm actually just going to move all these for sake of organization and knowing what things do up here. So that is the way these all work. And this is important because I think it actually comes up in our very first set bonus. But before I cover this set bonus, we will go ahead and get some other ones. So let's just look at Pummel, or Flurry of Blows, which affects Pummel. So Flurry of Blows, let's pull up Pummel. Here's Pummel, so we know what exactly it does. So this causes the next use of Pummel to deal additional damage, increases damage of subsequent Pummels by up to 10%, and that goes 3 times, and is permanent until you exit combat or log out. So let's build a ton of metal here, and should be good to go for a while, and we will use Pummel, and hopefully I should see a buff that increases the damage of subsequent Pummel. And I did hear some people talk about this being broken, and it does appear to be broken. I'm not actually getting a buff that increases the damage of Pummel. That is something that sounds interesting, and I'll just double check. Use Pummel again just to be sure. Yeah, that's something that does not appear to be working, but it sounds like a neat effect. There's just a lot of cleaning up that needs to happen with Pummel, it seems, and fixing of things. So yeah, that's Pummel. I already gave my feedback on Pummel, but it really, I don't know. I'm just like totally stuck on it needing to stun enemies. All right, next up, this is another innate strength one. We'll get to that in a minute. minute. And then here's one, actually, when the brawler parries or evades, they deal damage to their attackers. This is something, I wonder if this has come up in combat analysis this whole time. We have totals, so I can go to that. What is that called again? That is called like a stinging nettle. So would that be called stinging nettle maybe? Yes, like a stinging nettle, there it is. It actually does a decent amount of damage. The average is 11.8k on the training dummy, which, as we have covered, is about maybe 30% of what a lot of the base metal consumers does, and kind of in line with the basic abilities there. So that's actually, I think, surprisingly a decent amount of damage from a mechanic like that. Moving on, we have the next set of innate strength. Set bonus there, but here is a very odd one. This is another thing that just feels like it doesn't belong, is how I'm going to say it. It says TBD, so this is something that is kind of in the second to last set bonus and goes in line with the traits that I just feel like don't belong with the brawler, and they just feel super odd. And essentially, light and devastation gives you plus 25% devastate damage, plus 25% light damage. Sounds familiar, huh? And this is one of the things where I really feel like the brawler, in my initial impressions, this is an example of where it really felt like it was incomplete and just needed working in. The way I would describe it as a rework of these things. They have the feeling of being placeholders to me. I don't know if they actually are. I don't think there's been any notes from Standing Stone Games officials on if these are or are not placeholders, if this is something they're intending to stay and maybe have that be an actual mechanic. But yeah, these three things that I know I just closed two out, they feel like they need to go and be replaced by other stuff, is my summing thoughts on that, and that is pretty much it. But the actual effect of it, your devastates will hit a little bit harder, and your single light damage, which is called latent light, will hit a little bit harder as well. So moving on, yes, we are finally at the innate strength mechanics, and this is honestly probably a bad idea. I probably should have done this very early in the video. Hopefully y'all don't mind me getting to this so late, but this is actually a pretty important mechanic when it comes to the brawler. That is the whole point of me organizing these skills as I have here, because it is very important to differentiate them being quick attacks, balanced attacks, and heavy attacks, because when you use a quick attack, you'll get a stacking damage buff. When you use a balanced attack, you will get a stacking finesse buff. When you use a heavy attack, you'll get a stacking critical buff. And while this mechanic was seemingly broken in the first beta build that I had for the early preview, it seems to be more functional now. So I used a heavy attack, I got a finesse buff. I'm going to use whatever this one is, actually honestly don't remember it. That is a quick attack, so I got a melee damage buff. And then the final one I have is the, what was that, heavy attack? And heavy attack gave me a critical rating buff. So that is what it does, and that's how it works. Now, I have a big point of feedback on the finesse and critical rating ones. I do not like that. I think it should give you percent, and I'm still not entirely sure on the finesse. One reason is because as you're building your character, some important stats to get to are capping your finesse and capping your critical rating, so that you're just at the cap. And the problem when you do that is anything that boosts the rating of those, such as these traits in this mechanic that seems kind of core to the brawler, is it wouldn't really have much of an effect. I would much rather see those as percents. I know that's less important for finesse because the technical cap is like 50%, I think, but usually you don't need that much where that actually comes into play. And for regular and low tier stuff, it's more like 25 to 30, maybe 35%. So yeah, while the mechanic sounds interesting to me, I'm just not a fan of these specific buffs. I have not heard many other players actually talk about the innate strength, which is odd to me because it being 3 traits and the set bonuses here and it being a similar thing for the blue line, it feels like a core thing, and your attacks are differentiated by quick, heavy, and balanced attacks. So it seems like something that is big that I haven't heard many people talk about or just comment on, that I feel like there's a lot lacking here. Not just in terms of like the quality of buffs and it being finesse and critical rating, but one of the bigger things that I think I mentioned earlier, maybe even on the last video, these are all kind of blending together to me at this point, is that I would love to see some visual differentiation between these, so you can just immediately know, oh, like this is a heavy attacker, this is a balanced attacker, this is a quick attack. It's just something you would have to memorize, and maybe after playing the class a while I would actually get that. But right now it's just more of an annoying thing how that functions. But the actual gameplay mechanics that I'll go ahead and go on about is it seems like you would want to maintain these buffs unless you're at the cap, then you just want to use a lot of strength skills kind of frequently, and these are ones you kind of want to use anyway. They're pretty strong abilities, so if I just use these, I could kind of quickly get up to that cap that I need of getting all the way to tier 4, which is plus 30% damage there. Actually, one use of Pummel is you can just cancel the induction on. Oh, that is finesse. I have been using... That is totally my mistake. It is quick attacks, which I believe are these ones at the top. The corruption removal skill. Helm's Hammer is probably worth using even when enemies don't have corruptions just for that effect now. But the point is, I was going to try to build up the plus 30% damage. And that is essentially the mechanic. Actually, that only went up to 25%. There's another discrepancy, just something that is off. So many things with that with the class, unfortunately. Whoa, that was weird. I don't know. Okay. Oh, I didn't skip around that time. I wonder if it's because the fireworks are there? Maybe a little bit. Okay. So setting that entertainment aside, this is supposed to be an actual video diving into the class and not the jumping with the fireworks that they're currently spawning. Let's see. Yeah, it just... I feel like stuff is missing here. So if I set the specific idea of using metal consumers just to get these specific buffs, I have found the gameplay to be a lot more enjoyable actually with that, and things make a lot more sense. So the abilities that I use, I think we have already covered quite a bit of this, but the heavy attacks, want to use those frequently just because the amount of damage they do. Mighty Upheaval is probably the exception there, but Strike Towards the Sky and Fist of the Valor already do a lot of damage. If we look at the balanced attacks, which gives us finesse, these are ones also used kind of frequently. I think Shattering Fist and First Strike have the most use out of these right now, and hopefully Pummel in the future. And then the raw power ones that give you damage, these are actually going to be the quicker attacks. So Fulgurant Strike is one to use. Helm Crusher occasionally might use the Vicious Knee just for fun, but setting that aside, Helm's Hammer seems to be one that would be worth using kind of actually whenever it's up and you don't need the corruption removal for the buff. So there are some skills that I would use in regular situations if I'm completely ignoring the innate strength mechanic that would work towards this, but it just has an odd flow to me is how I describe it right now. It's something that is very interesting, and that's why I guess I kind of hammer on with it right here, is it's an interesting mechanic that just doesn't seem to do much to spice up the gameplay for me right now. And before I go rambling all too much and repeating myself, I will just leave that there. And that is the general breadline as far as a deeper dive into especially the traits and the building aspect of it, and a little bit on the gameplay. So I guess for the final part of this video, maybe we will look into the gameplay in a little bit more detail just on this. Training dummy, if you're looking for more general gameplay, we will probably maybe look at that later, but I have done so in many other videos and we'll have some background gameplay, of course, more regular stuff. Okay, so if I were playing the class more regularly, this is more so how I would have my skills organized. Just a lot of my buffs here, all of my metal consumers up here, kind of in priority of how I would want to use them, and just a mental reminder of which ones are and are not AoEs. But this is in general how it would look, and it seems like the gameplay flow is going to be to, of course, build your metal, use your cooldowns. I think utilizing these on a semi-high frequency is actually going to be important, and prioritizing using Fist of the Valor. That is going to be the strongest skill, and as we covered in the previous video, specifically using Dexterous Hook as the important setup. But also, we want to use, actually, yeah, he has that. For some reason, there seems to be the vulnerability, there seems to be an issue with vulnerability actually consistently going on the enemy. I know I'm going against my own, yeah. It's still not going on him, but Low Strike is supposed to give a vulnerability debuff if you use it as a setup for a metal consumer, and that does not seem to be working right now. But outside of that, it seems like the best setup skill to use is actually going to be Dexterous Hook kind of frequently. One exception is, I'm actually curious how that works. So that did actually work. If you use Sinister Cross and use that as a setup for, it's supposed to be a setup for a metal spinner, metal consumer, but actually will set up Sinister Cross here will set up Helm's Hammer, which has no metal cost, and that will give you innate strength. So this is a combination I see being quite useful right now. I don't know if that will be, if that's unintended, will be worked out to not work that way in the future, but that seems to be a combination as well we have for the red line. Let's see, moving on. Yeah, Fist of the Valor, this is something you've probably seen in the background gameplay, and if you've watched any of my other Brawler content, just setting up with Dexterous Hook, strong Fist of the Valor seems to be the high priority for the Brawler. Otherwise, metal consuming, as a note on gameplay flow, metal building feels a little bit slow. It's kind of leaves some odd breaks, essentially, is how I feel. Some odd breaks where I have enough metal to use a metal consumer, but then I don't want to use them. Maybe this is just a style that I have to adapt to, or just a style I am not a big fan of. Also, the abilities are going off really slow right now. I think that's due to server lag, and the server Bulwark here, the beta server, has been extra laggy lately for some reason. But yeah, that's the general gameplay and just some notes I had with playing that. So I hope this section was a little bit helpful for this video. Wow, that was actually a really big hit for Full Grit Strike there. That crit, I think, about 3 times the damage it normally does with all the buffs and boosts that brawlers get through combat. Alright, so at this point, that is all I have for this video on the Redline Brawler and doing a deeper dive into them. In the next part of learning the Brawler, I will be taking a look at the Blue Line in a pretty similar format, and just as a note, I am having to record these videos all in rapid succession and very quickly for me, so because the beta will actually be closing soon, I have not had much opportunity to play on Bulwark besides the first day, which was actually didn't even have much opportunity then, so I'm kind of stuck because unfortunately the beta is not lasting through the weekend, which I think really kind of sucks, and has been something I've noticed about previous betas and LOTROs. They last through the week, the weekdays, but not the weekend, which would give me a lot more time to actually test this stuff out. But that is all right because I am actually getting it done. It is just a note I am recording these in rapid succession if it feels a little bit odd and like I am kind of going a little bit fast. I'm not trying to, but it was a note that I just thought of here. Otherwise, that is all I do have for this part with learning the Brawler on the red line as we have it. And I hope it was helpful for you all to see the deeper dive into the red line traits and a little bit into the gameplay and gameplay flow. But yeah, next up we will have the blue line in the next video, and then probably a look at the yellow line. That one will be a lot more simpler, thankfully. But with that, that is all I do have for this video. Again, you all can give me feedback. I, of course, won't be able to take that in until the next set of videos, perhaps later on when the class is actually released or something like that, or whenever we get a new class that is this early as a kind of learning it type series. But if you do have that, I still would appreciate it. And even with that, I hope you all did enjoy this video and learn something useful about the Brawler. And if you did, please consider liking and subscribing for more, or becoming a channel member to support the content. And thanks for watching, everyone.